And the last fourth turning during the 1930s and 40s, it was said that we had one of the worst economic times in the human history. But what was actually happening? If we look at GDP, the red line is going to be consumer price index, and then the GDP is going to be the blue line. If you crunch these numbers into a GDP calculator, we had a real GDP of 239%. That is going to be very important in a second. So think about that. During one of the worst economic declines in human history that we have always been taught, the Great Depression during the 1930s, and then the worst war we have ever seen to date. If you compare that to any time in history, you would expect that is going to be the worst, at least with regards to America. I'm sure if you asked any average person, that is what you would suspect, right? Let's just go for the last 30 years. This is the same time horizon, but just going for the last 30 years. What have we seen? If you crunch these numbers and calculate real GDP, it is 136%. Why is this important? This is almost half. We, in the past 30 years, have experienced almost half the GDP that we did during the Great Depression and World War II. That was the last fourth turning. That is usually the peak of your economic decline. But what have we seen? We've seen much worse than that. In fact, 50% worse growth in the economy in the past 30 years than we did during the Great Depression and World War II. This is one of the most shocking things I have ever seen. And what does this mean for human psychology and what we've seen recently? I mean, what do we see? We see social unrest building. That is almost always an economic structure. We see lack of opportunities from young people. They go to college, get dead-end jobs, and are pretty much just supporting the consumer economy via services. There's no real productive jobs out there. That is because of the lack of economic prosperity that we've seen, and we can see this in the real GDP charts. Justin, what are your thoughts?
Josh, if you go back to the chart, the way I would kind of think about this is that even if you have a very solid GDP number, if that number is, so that would be the blue going up in the middle. If you also have CPI rising to a point where the inflation eats away at any gains or the majority of the gains made in GDP, I don't know if you're really winning. So let me say that in better English.
Well, what we just calculated was real GDP. We did CPI minus nominal GDP.
Right. But my point is that as CPI increases, real GDP goes down.
Yeah, but we had much higher CPI during the 1940s than we did during the past really 20 years.
Right. So the point that I'm trying to make, though, is, Josh, if you go back to the graph, or here's where I'm going with this. If you had a raise from 15 to 25 bucks an hour, but suddenly
that's
gas...
just how real GDP is, though. I mean, that's just what real GDP is, just the growth of the economy minus the inflation rate. So nominal GDP would be the growth that we have seen, but not including inflation. So if we were calculating nominal GDP, it would be through the roof. But then adjusted for inflation, it comes down.
My point from all this is that I think one of the reasons we kind of are in this situation right now is that people are upset because they're feeling the impacts of less goods and services, but they're not necessarily seeing the connection yet of what's going on. Did you see what I'm trying to say? Like, it's one of these weird ways where like people will look rich, but they're going to feel poor. That's kind of like, the big picture of what I'm trying to go at from all of that.
So with all this in mind, you'd think, well, we have all these great inventions, Uber, Airbnb, all these things that we use, the technology boom. Josh, think about all the technological revolutions that we've had with AI and everything else. How is this humanly possible? Well, think about it. Back in the day, I mean, in the 30s, 40s, even 50s, 60s, you could have one person, the man would work, and they would support the entire family. They would have a bunch of kids. I mean, back in the day, they'd have probably 5, 6, 10 kids sometimes. They would support a wife. They'd have a car. They'd have a nice house. That would be,
and the wife wouldn't work.
Yeah, that'd be all supported on one person's labor. Think about the economic productivity that one person would be producing to get that much excess energy that he could spend in the form of currency units for his entire family. I mean, that is remarkable. What do you have to do today? I mean, now you have to have the man and woman working full time, and then right when the kids are born, they have to get a job just to make ends meet because of how little you can really consume with the productivity that you are being that each person is really producing. And Justin, you are really big into the history cycles, right? I mean, these past 30 years. Most people would argue that we were at least in the 90s, early 2000s, we were still in a third turning, maybe easing into the fourth, but nowhere near the pinnacle. I mean, usually the further you get into that fourth turning, the worse the economic land gets. So if we continue to see real GDP going down, I mean, even potentially substantially like we did in the 30s, what is that going to look like for the next decade? I mean, where are young people today going to find opportunity? Because, I mean, what happened in the 30s? There was almost no jobs. In the GFC, there was almost no jobs. But if we suspect that it's going to be worse than the GFC, then what are people going to do to try and get ahead in life?
I don't know. But I do think that part of the problem we've got right now is we've got this interesting situation where people look rich, but they feel poor. And I think a large part of that is due to false signals that asset bubbles can send to people, more so from a psychological basis. Josh, earlier on, you noted that people just kind of seem to be tuning out. They seem to be more unhappy. They might not be able to put their finger on it, but they kind of sense something is off. And I think this is the tremors, like the foreshocks of an earthquake that's going to come through. People are going to finally realize, like, wait a minute, everything that we're being told isn't necessarily adding up. And sooner or later, there's going to be a thirst, I think, to figure out just exactly what's going on there. As far as what'll happen, how it'll happen, that I don't know. I would say that we probably went from the third turning to the fourth turning. If you want a line in the sand, I would probably say 9/11 would be the example for that. I'd also note this too, is that George Friedman notes, who was also big on cycles too, is that you would see, like, just like Andrew Jackson tried to run but lost, representing the new era. He would then come back and win, and when he came back and win, he basically demolished the central bank of the United States of America. But he didn't do it on the first time. Likewise, Friedman argues that you will see Trump was like the first gasp of the new system, trying to take control of the old system. So there's the Trump presidency. He was elected out or voted out. And then you would have like Biden standing in. So I mean, it's interesting, but like I don't know how to, like, I'm just not enough up here for me to put it all together.
Yeah. Yes. So what else do we see? We see the 1% of people just outlandishly rich, and people feel rich because they look on Instagram and they look at all their friends, and people know that on Instagram, people are only posting the best portion of their life. So that when they go on their vacation, when they rent that nice car, and they see the rich people, or the perceived rich people that they see doing this every single day, they're posting, going on every single flight, doing all these super fun activities, and they think, damn, this person must have the absolute best life ever. They are living exactly like I'd want to. Why can't I do that? I mean, it doesn't seem like this person's too much smarter than me. Why do they get the fruits of labor, just unlimited amounts of wealth or perceived wealth? I think a lot of that just has to do with the psychological impact social media will really have on people.
I would say it'd be like the optics. Like, people are going to look rich, but they're going to feel poor. That's what it boils down to.
So, yeah, and we've seen a substantial amount, which it was really shocking when I saw these statistics as to how bad the economy really is. I mean, we talk about bank lending just taken off, plummeting since after the GFC, and real economic prosperity has really gone with it. So the only thing that's really funding it is the US government. And as we know, the government is probably the absolute worst spender of money, even worse than Justin, some would argue. And Justin's investors would be shocked to hear that.
Yeah, every now and then, Walmart gets out Walmarted, but yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you. We'll see you in the next one.